Tonight, the Brittany Higgins rape case goes to court again, but this time under new rules that raise the stakes for both sides. Someone is going to be ruined. And I'll cross to Israel for a breakthrough deal. Hamas releasing some hostages. But is this actually a trap for Israel? Plus, one of my regular guests is menaced at a pro-Palestinian protest. I'll talk to him on how he survived that. And Kevin Rudd, ambassador, forgets that he's not the Prime Minister anymore and attacks China like the real Prime Minister won't.
I think China's activities through the Chinese naval destroyer has been outrageous.
But first, now I said last week the Albanese government had a leadership crisis, was cracking, tick, 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 I said. And every day there's more proof of exactly that. And today, well, dear God. I mean, seriously, what is it with this government and our borders, just for a start? Last week, for instance, the government released more than 80 people from immigration detention, including murderers and rapists and pedophiles, without any means to control them. It hadn't prepared for a High Court decision ordering it to let them free. In fact, today the Home Affairs Minister admitted she didn't even know that 4 sex offenders, among those 80, were not even wearing the tracking bracelets she'd promised. And she threw her junior minister under the bus.
Is it half? Is it 3/4? Is it almost all of them? Or is it none of them who have ankle bracelets on? Can you give us some idea?
Yeah. Andrew, Minister Giles is implementing the scheme and he'll provide an update to you.
The New South Wales Attorney General didn't know anything about it either.
That's a federal matter. I haven't had a briefing on that.
You're telling me the Attorney General, the top lawmaker in New South Wales, has not been briefed by his federal counterpart?
No, that would be a matter for the police and corrections.
The West Australian government said it didn't even have the power to put those tracking bracelets on the detainees that it had. What a total farce. Your safety, but do they care? Now you wonder how this government could top that dangerous incompetence. Well, answer is easy. This afternoon, we discover, simply through a news leak, not any official announcement, this government has quietly issued temporary visas to 860 Palestinians from Gaza, as well as the West Bank. People with, it said, had some connection to Australia. Now, seriously, Israel's Muslim neighbours, like Egypt and Jordan, they don't take Palestinians, in part from the security risk. For one, a survey just a few days ago of Palestinians shows 75% supported the Hamas slaughter of the Jews on October 7. Most very strongly supported it. But this government's saying, well, yes, come on over to Australia. 860 of you. Now, to issue that many visas in that short a time, it works out to 20 visas a day over the 6 weeks since the October 7 terror attack by Hamas. How is it remotely possible to have run proper security checks? Penny Wong says, oh, don't worry, the Border Force is checking. But that fast? And how? With a war zone in Gaza, a territory run by literally a terrorist group? Do you ring, hey, Hamas, is this person clean, according to you? The opposition's immigration spokesman, Dan Tehan, is not the only person astonished.
This is the first we've heard of this, Kieran, and once again we need proper transparency from the Albanese government. We keep hearing things via the media, especially when it comes to immigration matters, rather than the government being upfront with the Australian people. So it would be very good if we understood what visas are being granted and what security checks are being undertaken as part of the granting of these visas.
I mean, this government's turning into a circus. So take the Foreign Minister, the very left-wing Penny Wong. She tried to excuse this today by saying, well, we also issued visas to Israelis, as if, you know, Jews are also a security risk to us.
Over the same period, I think between the 7th of October and a couple of days ago, we had 1,793 visas issued to Israeli citizens.
Oh, pull the other leg, Penny Wong. I mean, who in Australia feels threatened by Jews coming over? When was the last time you saw a Jew here charged with terrorism, say, or shooting people dead on the streets of Sydney? I mean, grow up. And today, more confusion, more mixed messages. It should have actually been a good news day for the Prime Minister, who finally stepped up, and credit to him, for joining opposition leader Peter Dutton to reopen Melbourne's Holocaust Museum. jointly standing against this sickening Jew hatred now in our streets that has exploded under this government's watch.
Since the atrocities of the terrorist action by Hamas on October 7, Jewish Australians have been bearing a pain you should never have had to bear again. And you are feeling fear, anxious that the long shadows of the past have crept into the present. That should not be happening in a land that offered refuge then and embraces you now. As the conflict continues, anti-Semitism is on the rise, but we will not let it find as much as a foothold here. Australia will always denounce it and reject it utterly, just as we do all forms of racism and prejudice.
We stand here today having been filled through our television screens of the hate-fuelled mobs marching through major democratic cities calling for the slaughter of Jews. We're witnessing an unmasking and a resurgence of the same hateful thoughts and behaviours which led to the Holocaust.
So that's good, right? I mean, Dutton's always been strong against the anti-Semitism, but Albanese's up to now seem to think he can't say too much without defending Muslims. Or Labor's anti-Israel left. So we say, oh, the Jews this, but also the Muslims. But like I say, credit for his speech this morning. The problem is that on the very same morning, Tony Burke, his workplace relations minister and a leadership wannabe, sent a very different message when he was asked on the ABC about the violent pro-Palestinian protest at Sydney's Port Botany last night. Police arresting 23 people trying to stop an Israeli ship that they laughably claimed was transporting weapons of mass destruction. Burke started with a careful caveat, but then actually defended the protest.
I'm always wary of where some protests can morph or ignite in different ways anti-Semitism. But let me say this. The view of the community that I represent is very much they just want the deaths to stop.
Now, when Burke says the community I represent, I'm guessing he means the 25% of voters in his seat of Watson who are Muslim. And funnily enough, apparently this community he represents wasn't also demanding Hamas release the nearly 240 hostages it took in Israel on October 7, wasn't demanding Hamas surrender given its promise to massacre Jews again and again. That's a quote, again and again, like it did on October 7, 1,200 of them. And I say that because Burke is also back to Sydney Council flying the Palestinian flag, mentioned none of that. Seems to me he just wanted Israel to stop fighting back. And it's this Labor focus on Israel as the warmonger, not the victim, that is helping to license this Jew hatred that shames us to the world. And until Albanese shuts down ministers like Burke and Wong, Australia's Jews should take the Prime Minister's words today with a lot of salt. And no wonder. They should also ask, how long can this go on? But to good news in this war in Gaza, but also a real danger for Israel, a new one. Hamas, the terrorist group which runs Gaza, has agreed to release about 50 of the 240 hostages that it took from Israel in its October 7 attack, including, of course, dozens of children as young as 10 months old. It's going to release, in exchange, Hamas will release 50 women and children over a 4-day truce in exchange for Israel releasing 150 Palestinian prisoners. And it's also going to send, Israel will also send more food and fuel to Gaza. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says after those 4 days, the war continues.
Outside, there is a lot of nonsense talk, as if after we cease fire for the release of the hostages, we will stop the war. So I would like to clarify, we are at war and we will continue to fight until we reach all our goals. We will not let go until we reach the absolute victory and until we bring them all back.
Joining me from Tel Aviv is Lieutenant Colonel Peter Berner from the Israel Defence Force. Lieutenant Colonel, thank you very much for your time again. Which hostages are Hamas releasing and which prisoners are you releasing in exchange?
Thanks, Adam. Yes, indeed, the situation is one that is going to be determined by the government of Israel and, I guess, the terrorist government of Hamas. The reports that are suggesting some 50 women and children that would be released, we have yet to see. And of course, we need to be very skeptical with anything Hamas says. From our position, of course, when we look at the disparity, we need to keep in mind that those that are being released by Hamas, or those that are supposed to be released by Hamas, are innocent civilians, women, men, and children. This is the reality where we will be releasing convicted terrorists. This is the way up of what we are facing currently.
That's amazing. So they're releasing innocents, you're releasing terrorists and criminals. And I noticed the scale too, where apparently for Hamas, one Jew is worth 3 Palestinians by their calculus. Says something about their values. When is this exchange going to happen?
So, this war effort from our perspective has always had 2 goals, and they operate and they are hand in hand. First of all, dismantling and destroying Hamas as a terrorist government of the Gaza Strip to make sure that they can never have the power to govern the Gaza Strip as a terrorist organization. And secondly, the release and the rescue of the hostages. There is currently a process that is taking place here in Israel. There is the civil discourse and a judicial process that people will, if they object to the agreement, will have their day in court and they'll be able to present their case. Once that is cleared, either way, the IDF will be instructed to have an operational pause and hold our fire in order to enable the hostages to be released and to enable humanitarian aid in order to access in a broader scope to the Gaza Strip, to the people of Gaza, specifically in the south of Gaza. So it'll be determined basically on the process that needs to go through our civilian arena, which is an important process in our democracy. It means that everybody has their day in court and everybody can present their problems that the government, with whatever the government is presenting. Our role as the IDF is to be prepared on the ground for any eventuality. I can say that today we're still fighting, we're still engaging Hamas, even this morning, and we're making sure that they have less and less terrorists and less places to operate from freely. There is no ceasefire yet, there is no hold on our force, and we continue to fight and destroy Hamas every single day, as we have for the last 6.5 weeks.
But Lieutenant Colonel Berner, I mean, in some ways, the 2 goals are in conflict, releasing the hostages and also fighting and keeping your soldiers as safe as possible in the conflict. What can't Israeli soldiers who are now in Gaza do during the 4 days of the ceasefire? I mean, for one, you can't even use drones to check where the hostages are being held and are being released from. What else can't you do?
So it's not what we can't do, it's what we can do. We can regroup, we can be prepared, we can maintain defensive capabilities. And of course, we won't take any aggression against us as a hold and pause in our operations takes place. You presented Prime Minister Netanyahu's words. We are determined to destroy Hamas and negate their capabilities. And this is just a pause. And in a pause, we will be regrouping, repreparing, refueling, taking a defensive outlet and posture in order to be prepared for the next stages.
But here's the problem, of course, you're saying you're regrouping, Hamas will be regrouping. They're the ones that actually wanted, desperate for this pause. So they think they can make it to their advantage. Now, your Prime Minister has said that this truce, this 4-day truce, could be extended for 1 day for every 10 extra hostages Hamas releases. Given how many they've got, this pause could theoretically, it's not going to do that, but theoretically last for 6 months. How many days of the truce before your soldiers sitting in Gaza today, having to do this ceasefire in the meantime, are in too much danger from a Hamas counterattack? How long can you just sit there?
So we've experienced Hamas in ceasefires in the past. In 2014, we know what they have done in 2014. They came out of tunnels, attacked our forces. So we obviously will have to be very, very strong in our defensive, but also maintain our operational superiority. And that is a reality that exists. This is why we have killed hundreds of their terrorists, several thousands actually of their terrorists on the ground. And we will maintain our operational capability in order to achieve our goals, Adam. This isn't a war we wanted, but it's a war we have no choice but to defeat.
Well, it's a danger your troops are being forced to undertake for the release of the hostages. Let's hope it all works out.
But it is the role of the soldiers to defend. Adam, it's the role of the soldiers to defend the people. It is, this is the role of the IDF. We put ourselves in that line of fire. We put ourselves at the mercy for the people, and this is, we're not sacrificing ourselves. We have a very strong sense of calling, precisely because that is our role. That is the job. That is, with 300,000 reservists called up, the largest recruitment of reservists in the history of the State of Israel.
Yep.
It just goes to show that we have...
It's been an amazing response. Been an amazing response from Jews all around the world. I saw the exit line at Ben Gurion Airport, a photo today, empty. No one's leaving, everyone's coming. Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, thank you so much for your time. A change in pace. The Brittany Higgins rape case is back in court, and the stakes now couldn't be higher. Someone is going to be destroyed here. Now, Higgins, of course, is the former Liberal staffer who accused colleague Bruce Lehrmann of raping her in the Parliament office of the Defence Minister after a drunken night out. Now, Lehrmann, of course, denies it, and the criminal trial last year was called off due to juror misconduct without any verdict. The prosecutor also dropped the charge and said there'd be no more new trial because the stress could kill Higgins. But she's back because Lehrmann is now suing Channel 10 and presenter Lisa Wilkinson for defamation, for effectively identifying him and treating him as a rapist in a broadcast long before the criminal trial. This is 2 years ago. He says they destroyed his life. Now, Higgins, you might recall, got up to $3 million of compensation from the Commonwealth Government, thanks to the Albanese government, thank you very much, will now give evidence in this case. But today was called in court an unreliable witness by Lehrmann's barrister, given inconsistencies in the evidence she gave in the initial trial, and her delay in complaining of rape, and how information on her phone came to be deleted, and so on. But Higgins this time, in this case, this defamation one, has advantages she did not have in the criminal one. Joining me to explain that is Adrian Anderson, a prominent barrister specialising in defamation, whose must say declaration has fought the good fight for me as well. Adrian Anderson, thank you for your time. Look, this defamation case, it is in effect the rape trial again, isn't it? To work out, did the rape actually happen? But this time conducted under different rules, correct?
Well, it is, Andrew, because there's a truth defence here. So 10 and Wilkinson are saying it's true. The essential allegation is the one of rape of Higgins, and that's the key question in the trial, and it's big stakes because if it's not proven to be true, then it really raises the stakes in terms of potential damages. But it's a different set of rules. As you said, in a civil case, the test is the balance of probabilities. Criminal case, beyond reasonable doubt.
So that means it would be easier for Brittany Higgins, who's, we're told, will take the stand, probably will take the stand. It'll be easier for her to get a verdict, so to speak, out of this, that she was indeed raped, because, like you say, it doesn't have to be beyond reasonable doubt, just on the balance of probabilities. So this could be much easier than her previous trial.
Yeah, there's a couple of key differences, Andrew. The balance of probabilities is a much less onerous test. That's just to say, is it more likely than not, compared with the beyond reasonable doubt, which is more like, say about 90-10, at least 90% sure. You've got to be more than 50% sure. So it's a big difference. The other thing is that there are different rules in play in terms of what you're allowed to ask the witnesses, and in this case, you'll expect that Lehrmann will give evidence because he's the plaintiff, and he'll have to give some evidence about the effect the publications had on him, so he can be cross-examined as well, which was not the case in the criminal trial where he had the right to remain silent.
But also I read, and I'm not an expert, Adrian, but the rules of the criminal case, which was then, aborted, the rules there led to a protection of Brittany Higgins as well. There were certain questions, certain routes that the defence could not go down. But this is different, isn't it? There are fewer rules to defend her as well.
That's true. The law puts in place some protections about the sort of questions that can get asked of an alleged victim in a sexual assault case, and those rules are different in a civil case. So yes, that's the case, but also there's the opportunity here for the plaintiff, Lerman himself, to be cross-examined, which changes the dynamic as well.
Wow, it's all getting a bit heated. Here's a curious thing. Now, Bruce Lerman has also been accused of another case of rape, but not using a condom when there was an agreement to do so. He's pleaded not guilty, right? So that is not part of this trial at all. He's pleaded not guilty. But why would he have held this trial before that one when, if he gets a verdict against him here, like it or not, that's going to create a little bit of a reputational risk going into the other trial?
Yeah, well, it's a very good question, Andrew, because if he is found by a judge to have raped Higgins, then that is very highly prejudicial to his outstanding charges in Queensland. So they've obviously made a calculated decision, taking all that into account. And it's also interesting from the Ten's point of view and Wilkinson that they didn't want to haven't asked for that case to play out because that might be, let's say, for example, that were to be determined adversely to Lerman, that would no doubt be something they would rely upon, at least on the question of damages. So, this case will get decided, this defamation trial, in the absence of knowing what's going to happen in that subsequent to those subsequent rape charges.
What a legal minefield, Adrian. It's unbelievable. Now, just one last thing. Is it unusual here for Channel 10 to have their lawyers and their presenter, Lisa Wilkinson, to have her own lawyers when they're both defending the same allegation that they defamed Lerman on Channel 10?
It is unusual, Andrew, but not completely uncommon. And sometimes, for whatever reason, one of the defendants will feel more comfortable with their own legal representation, or other times they'll consider that there is a conflict of interest. The one difference that there appears in their cases potentially is that Wilkinson says she relied on the producers of the project and 10 to conduct some of the relevant checks and to give Lerman the opportunity to respond, and was relying upon them for that. So whether that's a point of difference that played some part in her having legal representation is a possibility as well. And
finally, I said finally before, but finally, Adrian, isn't it strange if everyone had just shut up and let the courts decide whether the rape had occurred and stopped speculating in the media, none of this would have come to the courts now. True?
Yeah, and I think that's right, Andrew. And one other very interesting thing about this is this publication took place before the defamation laws were changed. So what that does, it means that if Lerman can establish that he gets aggravated damages, it means there is no cap on the damages, and potentially opens up a very significant damages award. So it's high stakes, this truth defence by the defendants. It escalates damages if you lose, but the consequences for the plaintiff if you win, it's not inconceivable that they could reopen the criminal allegations if there were such a finding made.
Wow. Well, Adrian Anderson, good heavens, thank you so much for taking us through this morass. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, Andrew.
After the break, the petrol tax. Do you deserve a cut for Christmas with all this cost of living pressures? Well, Australia's richest person says yes. And why are we importing 500,000 people a year without building more dams to water our cities. We'll talk about that after this. This is when we get too complacent, because we're okay right now for drinking water after a few years of great rain, but that can change very fast, as we know from 15 years ago. Drought, run out of water. The problem is that in the meantime, we are adding a hell of a lot more people, 500,000 a year, but we haven't built a single extra dam in decades for the big cities. And there's not one planned. We are sitting ducks come a drought. But Small Mercy's work has just been finished on the biggest weir, at least, that's built in Australia since World War II. It's a disgrace that it took that long to build another one that big. This one is to help farmers and townspeople around central Queensland. Joining me is National Senator Matt Canavan, former Resources Minister. Matt, how did this project sneak through when we've had a phobia for decades about building dams for the cities?
Well, elections have consequences, Andrew. The LNP first put forward the money on this in the 2016 election. Barnaby Joyce and even Malcolm Turnbull was on board. Andrew came up, and myself and Michelle Landry there locally announced this. We won that election, and there was the state government just dragged their heels for the whole term of government, demanded more studies that we funded. And then we unexpectedly won the 2019 election, and effectively the state government was shamed into it. They were never going to get elected again in central Queensland unless they did this. So we just kept up the fight. And it's like the No campaign, like the dams, like the Adani fight we had at the same time. When we as a party, we as a political movement, stick to our guns and fight for things like dams, we can get results because people want them. They want this. It's very popular. And even now the Labor Party are on board. They've all come to central Queensland to take credit for this project, when invariably I'm sure if we'd lost that 2019 election, they would have cut the funding for this dam, just like they would have, just like they have done, I should say, for $7 billion of dam funding that we left them when we lost government last year. Those dams like Urena Dam, the Hells Gate Dam in North Queensland, they hadn't started yet, so they were easy to knock off from the Labor Party, and unfortunately we won't have any action on those projects right now, because the question is, if Labor Party is saying this dam is so good, and you're absolutely right with your intro, we need to build dams as our population grows so we can secure our water supplies, grow our farming sector. If this dam is so good, why won't the Labor Party fund the next one? Why don't we do the next weir, the next dam? We're now just back to being a standstill and doing nothing as a nation, which is very sad.
Well, I mean, people don't seem to realise this is the driest continent apart from Antarctica, I believe. Water is gold, and we just keep letting it run to waste in the sea. I just don't get it. Hey, Matt, as I said last night, what is that behind you, by the way? It looks a terrific little do. I wouldn't mind dropping in myself. What have you got going on there?
Well, we've got a Christmas party season, but we're also taking the opportunity to say thanks to all the no volunteers here. I'm up in Mackay with Andrew Wilcox and Bridget McKenzie here as well. So, yeah, we're just taking the opportunity to say thanks to all those people. We'll have other functions around central Queensland. We won that campaign based on people. It was based on courage, on fight. But we won the Australian people. As I say, it's just a good example about why we need to push back against all these agendas. Net zero, all of this. When we do, we normally win.
That's so true. I mean, mate, can you send some of that message down to the Liberals in Victoria? Now, I said last night the government's green energy targets look absolutely impossible now. The whole thing is a shambles. I think there's not one target it's going to meet. The latest blow, as said last night, warnings from the Transport Department, the government won't meet its target of electric cars in 2030. Its target of making up to 89% of car sales then electric vehicles. The department says not even close, not even a third. Matt, I've since seen that electric car sales in Europe and the United States have also fallen off a cliff. People have stopped buying this spin. What do you make of all this?
Well, what I make of it is that governments are wasting a lot of your money on ridiculous subsidies for mostly wealthy individuals buying a certain type of vehicle. And I've got nothing against electric cars. You want to buy an electric car, go for your life. I just don't think my or your taxes or your viewers' taxes should be going to subsidise the consumer preferences of wealthy Australians. And keep in mind that it almost is invariably wealthy people who can afford, are the only ones who can afford electric cars, because the cheapest start at over $40,000. That's the base model. You really need to spend over $50,000, look, even $60,000 to get a decent electric car. And why the hell in a cost of living crisis are we wasting precious taxpayer dollars to subsidise the consumer preferences of the rich? We should be helping those that are most vulnerable among us, and there's a lot of people in that category right now who need that help. Keep in mind too, Andrew, this modelling is the same modelling the Labor Party used to say they'd save you $275 for the electricity bill. Obviously, it's been wrong on electric vehicles. I think it's going to be wrong on your electricity savings. And then the broader point here is all this modelling underpins the net zero agenda. So if this modelling is wrong and out by this much, why are we pursuing this whole net zero rubbish and craziness? Let's just get back to making good decisions that grow our wealth, help people have a job, afford a home. That should be the focus of government.
The danger is, of course, if they can't meet the electric vehicle target, they're going to take it out of someone else. The emission savings will probably be farmers. But you spoke about cost of living pressures, Matt. Australia's richest person, Gina Reinhardt, says, well, look, on that front, the government should be helping out by cutting the petrol excise tax for Christmas. Good idea?
I suggested the same a few weeks ago. I think, number one, the government has slowed down the infrastructure rollout. They're not spending as much money now in the next few years on roads. So why should we be paying so much on fuel excise? And we could easily fund a 1 year half discount on the fuel excise, save you 22 cents a litre, save the average family $600 a year by just using the savings the government has taken on not funding roads to do this. We could add top of that, let's end the EV subsidies, end the electric vehicle subsidies to the rich and use that to help the poor pay for their petrol to get to and from work and drop their kids off at school. I think that would be a much better spending of public money.
Now, Canavan, return to your party. Thank you so much indeed for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ed.
After the breakout, pro-Palestinian protests turn even more violent. So is this really the time for the government to import hundreds more Palestinians without proper security checks? And Kevin Rudd cuts loose after this. Former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd was handpicked as our ambassador to Washington by his good mate, the Prime Minister. Now, that was always asking for trouble. Kevin Rudd's ego, big. Former Foreign Minister Penny Wong, she sure didn't like the idea, warned Rudd to pull his head in and be a team player. But here we go. Prime Minister Albanese has said very little about the Chinese attack on our Navy divers last week, where one of its ships sounded its sonar to hurt them when they were in the water. We've talked all about that. Albanese hasn't wanted to say much about that to keep sweet with China, pretend they're still good mates, instead of denouncing this, well, unprovoked aggression. But Kevin Rudd, he's now cut loose like he's the Prime Minister instead of just the humble ambassador. Here he is in an exclusive interview with our Annalise Nielsen that we'll show tomorrow.
I think China's activities through the Chinese naval destroyer has been outrageous. Remember, this incident occurred within the Japanese exclusive economic zone. It's not exactly a piece of contested waterway somewhere nearer to the Chinese coast. And secondly, as you rightly point out, this action against HMAS Toowoomba occurs at a time when the Chinese have said that they are seeking to stabilise the relationship with the United States, stabilise the relationship with China, and stabilise the relationships more broadly.
Kevin Rudd saying it like the current Prime Minister won't. Joining me is the panel, Michael Costa, former New South Wales Labor Treasurer, and Federal Queensland Liberal MP Garth Hamilton. Michael, this was always going to happen, wasn't it, where the Prime Minister stopped being an ambassador and started dictating our government policy?
Well, you know my historic view on Kevin Rudd. I've never been a fan. He's the type of bloke that thinks he's the smartest one in the room with the least ability to match that perception of himself. Look, the problem is I'm conflicted because he's absolutely correct, and I don't often say that about Kevin Rudd. But he's not the Prime Minister, he's not the Foreign Minister, he's the bloody ambassador to the USA. I mean, he's not even an ambassador to that region. He's got to hide, I think, and really, Albanese's got to show some leadership. I expect a phone call from the Prime Minister to him, at least from the Foreign Minister, to pull him into line. He shouldn't be making these comments. He's completely out of his jurisdiction and remit. It's quite outrageous. But we all remember he wanted to be the Secretary General of the UN. He probably would have been better than the current bloke, but maybe that's what they should do, try and get him out before he does any more damage.
Well, I'm going to make a prediction. It won't be Anthony Albanese that rings Kevin Rudd. It'll be Penny Wong. But here, Garth, I mean, there's a free kick for you in a way, but to me, it's another small example of how the leadership vacuum in the spot where Anthony Albanese is allowing people to just run their own races. There's a breakdown in discipline, and this is an example of it.
Well, this is why we continue to call out Mr Albanese's failure of leadership. And as much as I agree with Michael that Kevin's right on this one, and gee, it's a tough day for the Prime Minister when Kevin Rudd appears to be a better leader than you. But, you know, the only reason this is happening is because Albo said nothing. The only reason that Kevin's had the opportunity to step into this space is because Mr Albanese hasn't spoken up. And look, let's all be honest here. No one believes that Mr Albanese did stand up to China, but equally, I think most people would believe that Peter Dutton would. And there's a clear difference in the offering of the two leaderships and the leadership styles between the two major parties.
Well, this is karma. I mean, Anthony Albanese wanted Kevin Rudd there. Now he's got him. Well and good. I just can't get over, Michael, the Albanese government granting 680 visas in 6 weeks to Palestinians with some unspecified connection to Australia, people in many cases living under or next to or even with the Hamas terrorist group, who knows, which runs Gaza, and granting those visas almost immediately. Isn't it true that the chances of proper scrutiny checking of those 680 applications in that short period of time, 860, got that wrong, 860 in that short time, proper security checks very low?
Well, I agree with you, Andrew, and let's make it all clear. This is not because they're Palestinians. It's because we're not confident that the process itself has been undertaken. There may be legitimate reasons. And remember, there are Christian Palestinians too, a small number, but a reasonably large community in Australia. Now, this allegedly is due to family relationships. I just want to make the point. Some of those people that were in front of the Opera House, I hope they aren't related to that family that was calling out gas the Jews. I mean, clearly we want scrutiny, and I think that's the issue. And the way this has been handled is appalling. It's they haven't come out and explained the reasons for it. They haven't created any framework for people to be able to scrutinise this. And the other thing I found really galling was to hear the foreign minister claim that there was some sort of equivalence by allowing Jews to come into Australia, Israelis. That's an absurd position to take. I mean, Israel's a liberal democracy, and clearly those people wouldn't be having the sort of views that some of the people that are likely to come out of Gaza have. So I think that was a pathetic attempt to justify her position. I think what they need to do is be transparent. There needs to be a press conference tomorrow with some assurances that ASIO and the other agencies have actually vetted these people.
Well, I just don't see how that is remotely possible. Now, I get that what you say, that some might be Christians coming out sponsored by Christians here, but seriously, Garth, what do you make of this? I mean, Wong's excuse, look, I gave twice as many visas to Jews, to Israelis. I mean, seriously, who worries about Israelis coming here?
Well, let's be clear. What this provides us is a great opening into the thought process of this Labor government. It's all about identity politics. The idea that someone's race, religion, creed, whatever is the important factor. What's important is that we have processes in place to keep Australia safe. That's what's important. Our government put those processes in place. All Labor had to do was follow them. That's all they had to do. We've got them in place. What matters is that the government commits to its responsibility, its first responsibility of looking after Australia. It hasn't done that. And I would point out this is the second failure under Claire O'Neill's magnificent leadership in her portfolio in the matter of a couple of weeks. This is clearly the weak link in this Albanese government in immigration, home affairs. And I think we're going to see this unravel further, unfortunately. There's so many questions to ask. Why they've chosen to do this at this time now? Has process been followed? And what steps have been taken to ensure that Australians are being kept safe?
Now, meanwhile, there's a pro-Palestinian protest in Port Botany last night. 23 more pro-Palestinian protesters arrested. There have been so many arrests now of pro-Palestinian protesters. I don't think a single one, well, there was one Jew that's been arrested, and that's only because he might be attacked by Palestinians as well, which is weird, at a Sydney protest. Now, I should say, they weren't all Palestinians at Botany, this Port Botany protest last night, despite so many of them wearing ethnic clothing and this radical chic, the Palestinian scarf. Have a listen to the New South Wales Chief Commissioner.
Police were very patient in dealing with that group, and 23 people are now before the court. In addition to that, I would say broadly that most of them were, a great large number of them were professional protesters who currently are protesting about the Gaza conflict, but next week they'll probably protest about something else.
Michael, you used to be the radical left. I don't really want to tell viewers that, but let's be honest. Before, you saw the light somewhere on the road to Damascus, why is the left so attracted to this cause? And why are so many pro-Palestinian protests so threatening and even violent?
Well, Andrew, I mean, that was 60 years ago, but I'm happy to cop it on the chin. The bottom line here is, and you've got to remember, even in those days, you had people on the left supporting Pol Pot. I mean, this is not unusual for the left. Every tin pot ratbag, genocidal regime, there'll be somebody on the left supporting them. And, Cuba and the Sandinistas, we've had them all. Part of the problem here is, and I think the police commissioner identified it, there is a sort of a fashionable group of people that think protesting is a sort of good substitute of earning a proper income, and they're out there protesting at everything. They wouldn't even understand the core issues, as we all know, but they are the useful idiots for the people that do understand what they're doing and causing mayhem on our streets. Look, it is good that the police have finally started to arrest these people. Law and order is what the public expects. They don't care about the protests. They care about law and order. And, the police are doing their jobs finally. And I think, the other issue, of course, Andrew, is all our institutions, particularly our universities, people with PhDs in victim theology, teaching these people that somehow this is a good manifestation of proper citizenship, and it's crazy stuff.
Garth, I'm out of time, but just quickly, why is it? Is it because the left gravitate to people that are anti-capitalist, Israel being more capitalistic, anti-white Israelis being generally, not all of course, whiter than at least Palestinians, and anti-people who are rich and free and democratic? Is it all that kind of stuff? Identity politics writ large, victimology?
I think we've got two issues. We've got a far left that we have a problem with. We have a militant far left in Australia. What a terrible thing to say. And we don't teach our kids our great stories, the great things about Western civilization that we should all be proud of, correct, the unifying effect of treating people as individuals. That's what we should be teaching our kids.
Enemies of Western civilization, I'm afraid, Garth. Michael Costa, Garth Hamilton, thank you so much to you both.
Thanks, Andrew.
And after the break, Patrick Christys on surviving a very threatening pro-Palestinian protest. How did he do it? Now, I said pro-Palestinian protests seemed much more threatening than pro-Israel ones, and boy, did one of our regular commentators find that out the hard way last week. Patrick Christys went to one of these protests at Tower Hamlets, and that's a very Muslim part of London, and it turned out very ugly. Have a look. Joining me is Patrick Christys, presenter for GB News, still, and no bruise on him. But Patrick, what on earth were you doing there?
OK, so we have had now a series of pro-Palestine demonstrations here. They initially started taking place just on Saturdays. Now we've got them on Wednesdays, we've got them on Thursdays, we've got them any other day of the week that they fancy it as well. And the narrative that was being put out by very worthy types on social media and in the legacy media anywhere was that these were all entirely peaceful. I went to go and have a little look, because what they started doing was taking children out of school to go and protest about calls for a ceasefire, and they were also turning up at MPs' offices, and that's what we saw there, a Labour MP's office, because they had not voted for a ceasefire. I just wanted to go and see why people were there, what was making them tick, and if they thought it was appropriate to try to, in my view, maybe indoctrinate children and intimidate elected officials. And what you can see there is clearly the bubbling undercurrent of hatred. I think proving that Suella Braverman, our now former Home Secretary, was correct to call them hate marches. What is interesting, though, Andrew, is that instead of just having a conversation with me, you're swarmed by people who are unwilling to engage in very, very basic questions about the Israel-Hamas conflict. And the suspicion there, really, it's more than just a suspicion, is because if you do ask them basic questions, you unearth a rampant undercurrent of anti-Semitism that there is amongst certain elements of that community, and they would rather just shout at you.
Well, did you feel threatened there?
Well, it was an incredibly threatening situation just generally. I mean, the camera is your ultimate protection in those situations. My general mood while that is happening is just give them enough rope to hang themselves with, essentially. And that is not normal behaviour for people. You and I wouldn't behave like that. I don't think you and I would attend a march that would be attended by people of that mindset. And, you know, frankly, it is quite interesting to note, I think, how quickly a mob can turn. And I just wanted to try to show the reality there. You know, our BBC, Sky News, Channel 4 News that we have over here, some of the big ones, ITV, have not got in amongst it yet, but they are very willing to talk about how peaceful these protests are really and the kind of views that are on display there. I did, for what it's worth, attend a campaign against anti-Semitism rally on the Sunday, and that was entirely peaceful, and you can make of that what you will.
Argentina, famously, Britain under Margaret Thatcher went to war with Argentina to defend its sovereignty over the Falkland Islands, which are some way off the Argentinian coast. Well, Argentina's new president-elect, Javier Milei, I mean, I introduced him to viewers yesterday, screaming obscenities, dressing in comic characters, brandishing a chainsaw. An economist, an iconoclast, a crazy guy, says he now wants the Falkland Islands back. But your Prime Minister has warned that sovereignty is not up for negotiation. Where is this going to go?
Well, initially there was the threat of, is this nutter going to try to go to war with us? And there is that polite reminder to this chap that, you know, we did send the Argentinians packing not so long ago at the cost of around 250 British service personnel and around 690, I think it was, Argentinians. He has said that he wants to try to reclaim it through diplomatic means. Well, the people of the Falkland Islands have spoken. In 2013, they had a referendum there, and a turnout of 92%, 99.8% voted to remain British. In fact, just 3 people decided that they wanted the Falklands to not remain British. So from a diplomatic perspective, that's where we are. Grant Shapps, our Defence Secretary, has seen fit to send a warship back to the Falklands just in case. I do think that Javier Milei has got his hands tied, really, because you can't really say to the Argentinian people that you don't want them back. But look, I suppose the message from the Brits is back off their arse.
So many flashpoints now suddenly emerging all over the world. But let's finish on some good news, Patrick. Warmed the cockles of my heart, it did. Harry and Meghan apparently want an invite to Christmas with the royal family. You know, it's all gone sweet. I don't know that why do they do this, leaking this kind of stuff to the media? Because I don't know that came as a welcome Christmas gift to the royal family itself. What do you make of it all?
Well, no, absolutely. I mean, there are back channels to talking to their own family, which sounds ridiculous anyway, doesn't it? But they've chosen to put this statement out. I suspect it's because they're not going to get an invite and now they can play the victims yet again. I also suspect that even if they did get an invite, they probably would turn it down and they'd hide behind some excuse to say, oh, sorry, we've got to have Christmas with our kids in California, despite not really being seen with the kids that often whilst they're out attending events. Prince Harry dropping a puck at an ice hockey game in Vancouver, and even struggling to do that, a job that just takes you to hold your hand out and let gravity do the rest. And the chap who used to be more directly in line with the throne struggled with that. But apparently what this centres around really is not King Charles, who is spending more and more time with his grandkids now to try to maybe make up for a bit of lost time and pass some wisdom on to George. It centres around Prince William. And I don't think we're going to see any kind of truce there between William and Harry. I think those bridges are burnt. So Harry and Meghan, I don't think they're going to be tucking into the royal turkey.
Well, I think it's even more than that. I agree with you there, but there's one other thing. William would know that they're just looking for more material for another book or another revelation. They're running out of horror royal stories, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, there is the genuine, very real risk that Harry and Meghan would turn up wearing some kind of wire or that they would bring Netflix cameras in tow, or that every single thing that's spoken about over that dinner table would find its way into a Netflix documentary or
Patrick,
a Spotify podcast or whatever else it's had to do.
They've done it before. Why wouldn't they do it again? Patrick, great to see you again. Talk to you next week. Goodbye. Coming up next, Chris Kenny tonight. Good night.